Hello my dear friends, you're in the Military with Summary channel, and in this video we're going to discuss the most important events that took place during the previous 12 hours. We have lots of very interesting updates, so let's start. And first we're going to discuss the most important topic. The Russians once again carry out massive drone and missile strike all over the entire territory of Ukraine, and we have this map by the morning of the 9th of July of 2025. In this map we can see the approximate roads of Russian attacks. There are lots of lines, yellow, blue and red ones. The Russians use drones, the Russians use cruise missiles, this is the lines, red lines, and the Russians use the hypersonic missiles of Kinzhal. We're talking about blue lines. So according to all these lines, we can see two focus areas. The Russians attack the city of Zhytomyr and the Russians attack the city of Lutsk. The Ukrainians reported that as a result and during this attack, the Russians used around 741 targets, so 741 air targets. We're talking about drones and missiles altogether. Also, the Ukrainians added that they managed to destroy and to bring down 711 missiles out of 711 drones out of 728 drones. Furthermore, they emphasized that they managed to destroy 7 out of 7 Iskander-K cruise missiles. But the Ukrainians pointed that they haven't managed to bring down even a single hypersonic missile of Kinzhal. So now let's discuss targets that were attacked by the Russians. First of all, and once again, the Ukrainians shown us additional updates about the situation in the area of Zhytomyr. As a result of attack, the Russians damaged this airfield, and we have this morning these fire anomalies. As you can see, the airfield is covered completely with fire anomalies. Most likely the Russians managed to deal significant damage. I believe that the Russians destroyed airfields and air defense systems that Ukrainians use to, let's say, bring down Russian drones and missiles in the past. Furthermore, we believe that the Ukrainians kept several F-16s in this airfield also for air defense purposes. So when the Russians managed to suppress this air defense position, the rest of Russian drones and missiles moved further in the western direction to attack the city of Lutsk. As for the city of Lutsk, we believe that another airfield was damaged and destroyed by the Russians, but telling the truth, I watched the NASA map of fire anomalies, and since the morning of the 9th of July, the NASA map hasn't been updated. We don't know for sure what exactly the Russians attack. We have almost no information from the open source. We have just reports about explosions. We have just alarms about Russian attacks and nothing more. We believe that during the upcoming 12 hours, we're going to understand what exactly the Russians attacked, and we believe that the Minister of Defense of the Russian Federation will provide us additional details. Anyway, this was the biggest attack since the beginning of the special military operation. The Russians established new anti-record. They launched 741 air targets, in total drones and missiles. Now let's move further. Very interesting article was published about the Ukrainians. Ukraine no longer expects a quick end to the conflict, to the war that was stated by the Times. Ukrainian society is increasingly coming to terms with the fact that the war with Russia could drag on for much longer, former Defense Minister Alexei Reznikov stated. The focus now is not on negotiations or compromise, but on preparing for long-term confrontation. So which means that this conflict can take another 2 or even 3 years. Now let's discuss the situation on the ground. We have lots of very interesting updates, and first let's talk about the Sumy direction, where both the Russians and the Ukrainians resumed their attempts to attack each other. When talking about the Ukrainians, they managed to improve their positions once again in the western flank, in the area of the settlements of Constantinovka and Andreevka. First, let's compare the map between the dates. This is the situation by the end of the 8th of July of 2025. We'd like to remind you that we start receiving first updates that Ukrainians managed to answer the northern part of the settlement. Basically, the Ukrainians managed to cut the main supply lines that Ukrainians used to support their contingent on the territory of this village. And today we got additional report that Ukrainians managed to improve their positions, and currently Ukrainians control more than 40% of the settlement of Kondratovka. The Russians control just the southern and the southeastern part of the settlement. And telling the truth, we believe that the Russians were caught in cauldron without any possibilities for evacuation, because now we see see that Ukrainians are attacking the Russians from the north and from the northwest, and now we see that Ukrainians resume their attempts to establish complete control over the village of Andreevka and to attack the Russians in Kondratovka from the south and from the southeast. As for the village of Andreevka, we have this video where we can see how Russians were attacking Ukrainian edge positions on the territory of the settlement, which means that these positions were taken by the Ukrainians. So the situation is very difficult for the Russians, and currently I'm not sure that the Russians are able to, let's say, to hold control of this village for another few days. But their forces are not so far from this area, so it's time to start sending some reinforcement for stabilization. As for the original Sumy direction, during the previous 24 hours, according to several mappers, the Russians managed to improve their positions in the area of the settlement of Garnal. According to these changes, we see that the Russians at this point are moving in the direction of this huge forest that is located to the northwest of the settlements of Zaspilye and Miropolye. Maybe the Russians are trying to cut one of the supply lines that Ukrainians use to support their contingent in the area of Miropolye. So this is another offensive operation that was started by the Russians. Or maybe the Russians are planning to move further, deeper inside of the Sumy region with the purpose to establish complete control over the settlement of Magritsa. Anyway, time will tell, and sooner or later we're going to understand what kind of plans the Russians have in this area. Now let's move further and let's discuss the situation in the southern Kupiansk direction or the Lyman direction, where we can see ongoing clashes between the Russians and the Ukrainians. Most likely the Russians' plans were ruined. I'm talking about the plans of offensive operation in the direction of the city of Lyman, because the Russians started their offensive, but suddenly the Ukrainians carry out several successful and fast lightning counterattacks that allow them to restore control over the western and the northwestern parts of the settlement of Redgadub, and now the Ukrainians are trying to improve their positions. So that is why the Russians were forced to stop, and now the Russians are focused on clearing these territories once again and forcing the Ukrainians to fall back from this territory. So there are very heavy clashes in this area, and until the Russians the Russians can't move further in the direction of Lyman until they secure this area completely. Now let's discuss the situation in the Constantinovka direction. During the previous 24 hours, we have several changes on the ground. The Russians improved their positions along Kliban-Byksky pocket. Just a small, let's say, network of fortifications was colored in Russian favor today. Yesterday we had these changes, as you can see. Today we had another pocket colored in Russian favor. And the Russians, according to information we have, managed to improve their positions to the south and to the southwest of the settlement of Yablunovka, shortening the distance to the central part of the village. Most likely in coming days the battle for the central part of this settlement is going to start. At the same time, the Russians continue controlling the settlements of Kliban-Byk with the purpose not to allow the Ukrainians to escape this area. Lots of drones, lots of episodes were published by the Russians of how they were fighting with Ukrainian FPV drones and Ukrainian vehicles exactly in this area. As for the settlement of Novoekonomichne and the Pokrovsk agglomeration, I would like to remind you that 3 days ago the Russians launched their offensive operation, their major offensive operation, and the main purpose of that offensive was to answer the settlement of Novoekonomichne and to dig in deeper. Today the Ukrainians published additional videos and additional scenes of that battle. Here we can see how Russians were moving in the direction of the settlement, how Russians were landing infantry in different parts of this area, and at the final moments we can see that the Russians were answering and moving on the territory of the settlement itself. Based on this video we added additional geolocations, and based on this video we adjusted the map. So we have adjusted the territory between the villages of Elizavetov and Toretskaya because we believe that Russian vehicles were moving using these roads of attack, something like this, so that is why these territories were colored. Furthermore, several mappers completely adjusted the pockets between these villages by taking under control the Russian control additional tree lines, and several mappers improved positions of the armed force of the Russian Federation to the west of the settlement of Mirne. So as we discussed in the previous videos, despite the fact that the Russians answered the village of Novoekonomichne, currently the Russians are focused on maintaining the line and cutting this pocket completely. So this is the vital target for the Russians. This is a very important target for them. They need to shorten the lines. They need to probably semi-encircle the settlement of Novoekonomichna without gaps. So they need a short line, short front line, short line of combat contact. This will allow them to be much more flexible and mobile during offensive operation. As for the Dnipropetrovsk direction, the Russians, according to several mappers, entered the village of Muravka. This is the last settlement on the border between Donetsk and Dnipro regions in this part of Donetsk-Dnipro regions. So they're about to take this territory, and with the fall of Muravka, the Russians will be able to move further in the southwestern direction towards the settlement of Novopavlovka. As for the South Donetsk direction, during the previous 24 hours, several pro-Russian resources reported that the first groups of Russian regular army entered the village of Mirnaya from the west and from the northwest. So most likely during the next 24-48 hours, the Russians will secure this settlement and the Ukrainians will be forced to fall back. And the southern direction, we have additional changes on the ground. The Ukrainian sources published video from the settlement of Vilna Polya. This video was published by pro-Ukrainian sources, and in this video we can see how Ukrainians were attacking Russians in this area, and based on this video that was published by the Ukrainians, we adjusted the map. So it seems that the Russians resumed their offensive operation further in the direction of the settlement of Gulya Polya from the northwest, from the northeast, and the next target for the Russians is the village of Kamyshevacha. As you can see, according to this video, the Russians have already started bombing this territory with aviation and with bombs. The sources reported that the Russians finished the battle for the settlement of Malinovka. According, this information was provided today by pro-neutral mappers, so the village was secured completely, as you can see. We are waiting for additional details. Maybe these days the Minister of Defense will confirm this information. And the most important updates are coming from the Zaporizhzhia direction, where the Russians continue their fast-lighting attack, and during the previous 12 hours we got additional changes. For example, this is the situation by the end of the 8th of July of 2025, and just yesterday in the evening we got this video where we can see how Russians raised their flags in different parts of the settlement of Kamenskaya. Based on this video, we have almost colored the northern block of this settlement under complete Russian control, and this morning we got additional changes. As you can see, the Russians improved their positions already out of the settlement itself. Now the Russians are moving in the fields to the north of the river of Yanchikrak, and it seems that the Russians are planning to maintain the lines between the settlements of Stepova and the settlement of Kamenskaya by taking under control all these three lines and fortification there. Furthermore, the Russians continue their offensive operation along the settlement of Plavny in the northern direction. There are very heavy clashes right now for the central part of this small village. If the village of Plavny falls, this will lead to probably complete collapse of Ukrainian defense on the Zaporizhzhia direction. Furthermore, the Russians would be able to shorten the distance to the city of Zaporizhzhia itself, and the Russians will be able to start using drones to attack, let's say, the southern outskirts of the city of Zaporizhzhia, which is going to be obviously a huge media victory for the Russians. And that's it for the short video. Military Summary channel reminds we condemn any violence in the world. Thank you for watching, subscribe to my channel, put your likes, join my Patreon, and have a good day. Bye bye.